Welcome, friends, to an extraordinary journey through time. A journey that will take us deep into the heart of the 13th century, to the vast steppes of Mongolia, where one of history's most remarkable transformations took place. Today, I invite you to join me in exploring the incredible story of how a young nomad named Temujin became Genghis Khan and forged the largest contiguous empire the world has ever known. This is not just the tale of conquest and warfare, though there will be plenty of both. This is the story of how tribal divisions gave way to unity, how innovative military tactics revolutionized warfare, and how a legal code known as the Yassa laid the foundations for governing diverse peoples across continents. We will witness how trade routes connected east and west, how religious tolerance became imperial policy, and how the Mongol Empire fundamentally changed the course of world history. Our journey will be long, spanning from the tribal conflicts that preceded Temujin's birth to the vast empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe by the time of his death in 1227. Prepare to discover not just a conqueror, but an empire builder whose influence resonates through the centuries. The Mongolian steppes before Temujin. To understand the magnitude of Genghis Khan's achievement, we must first comprehend the world he was born into, a world fragmented by tribal warfare, where survival depended on strength, cunning, and the ever-shifting patterns of alliance and betrayal. In the late 12th century, the vast steppes that stretched across what is now Mongolia were home to numerous nomadic tribes, each jealously guarding their territories, livestock, and honor. These were not the unified Mongols of later legend, but rather a collection of related yet distinct groups: the Borjigin, Taichiud, Merkits, Tatars, Karaites, Naimans, and many smaller clans. The geography itself shaped their way of life. The harsh continental climate with its extreme temperatures and limited rainfall created a landscape of grasslands punctuated by mountains and deserts. Here, nomadic herders moved their flocks of sheep, goats, horses, and cattle across seasonal pastures, following ancient patterns established over centuries. Life was precarious. A harsh winter, known as a zood, could destroy entire herds and bring starvation to thousands. The tribal structure that dominated this world was both its strength and weakness. Each tribe was essentially a military administrative unit organized around the decimal system. Groups of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. These Mingan, units of 1,000, included not just warriors but their entire families, forming self-contained communities that could function as both fighting forces and economic units. Leadership was hereditary, but not absolute. A Khan ruled through consensus and success. Failure in war or inability to provide for the tribe could lead to abandonment by followers. This created a constant state of competition and instability, as ambitious leaders sought to prove their worth through raids, alliances, and territorial expansion. political landscape was further complicated by external pressures. To the south lay the powerful Jin dynasty, ruled by the Jurchens, who had conquered northern China and regularly interfered in steppe politics. They employed a divide-and-rule strategy, supporting some tribes against others, collecting tribute, and conducting punitive expeditions when necessary. The Western Xia kingdom controlled the vital Silk Road trade routes, while various Turkic peoples dominated much of Central Asia. Among the Mongol tribes themselves, ancient feuds ran deep. The Tatars were particularly hated, having long served as agents of the Jin dynasty and been responsible for the deaths of several Mongol leaders. The Merkits specialized in raiding and kidnapping, while the Karats and Naimans were more powerful confederations that often dominated smaller tribes. The Borjigin clan, from which Temujin would emerge, held a special place in this world. They claimed descent from a legendary ancestor known as Kabul Khan, who had briefly united some Mongol tribes against the Jin in the early 12th century. But by the 1160s, the Borjigin were just one clan among many, their past glory a distant memory, as they struggled to survive in an increasingly fractured world. This was the world of Temujin's ancestors, a world where tribal warfare was constant, where today's ally could be tomorrow's enemy, and where the strong preyed upon the weak without mercy. It was a world that seemed destined to remain forever divided, where the concept of a unified Mongolia was nothing more than a distant dream. Yet it was precisely this harsh environment that would forge the character of the man who would change everything. The birth and early years of Temujin. Around 1162, near the sacred mountain of Burkhan Khaldun, beside the Yunnan River, a child was born who would reshape the world. According to the secret history of the Mongols, the infant emerged clutching a blood clot in his right hand, an omen that Mongol shamans interpreted as a sign he was destined to become a great leader. The child was named Temujin, meaning of iron or blacksmith, after a Tatar chieftain his father Yesugei had recently captured. Yesugei was a respected leader of the Borjigin clan, known for his prowess in battle and his alliances with powerful figures like Togrul, Khan of the Karaites. Temujin's mother, Hoelun, came from the Olkunut sub-tribe of the Conqueror, having been abducted by Yesugei from her previous Merkit husband, a common practice that would later have deadly consequences. Temujin was the eldest son of Hoelun, though he had an older half-brother Begter from Yesugei's first wife. The family also included his full brothers Hasar, Hachiun, and Temüge, his sister Temülen, and another half-brother Belgute. Like all Mongol children, Temujin learned to ride almost before he could walk, mastering the skills of herding, hunting, and archery that were essential for survival on the steppes. When Temujin was 9 years old, his father took him on a momentous journey. They traveled through dangerous Tatar territory to reach the Kongerad tribe, where Yesugei arranged a future marriage between his son and a girl named Berta. This alliance would strengthen ties between the Borjigin and Kongirad clans, providing mutual protection in an uncertain world. Temujin was left with Berta's family to learn their customs and await the appropriate age for marriage. But fate had other plans. On his journey home, Yasuge encountered a group of Tatars who, recognizing him as an old enemy, invited him to share a meal. The invitation was a trap. The food was poisoned, and Yasuge died within days, his strength failing as the toxins consumed him. A trusted retainer named Munglik was sent to retrieve Temujin, but arrived too late for the boy to see his father alive. Temujin returned to find his family in desperate circumstances. Without Yasuge's strong leadership, the Borjigin followers quickly abandoned the family, taking with them the herds and livestock that represented their wealth. Hoelun found herself virtually alone, responsible for 7 young children with no means of support. The Taichud clan, who had previously followed Yasuge, refused to acknowledge young Temujin's leadership, declaring him too young and weak to lead. They abandoned the family to die in the wilderness. A cruel but not uncommon fate in the harsh world of the steppes. What followed were the most difficult years of Temujin's life. The family was reduced to the lowest level of steppe society, forced to survive by fishing in the rivers, gathering roots and berries, and hunting small game. Hoelun proved herself a remarkable woman, keeping her children alive through sheer determination and resourcefulness, teaching them that survival required both strength and cunning. It was during these desperate years that several key events shaped Temujin's character. The first was his growing conflict with his half-brother Begter, who, as the eldest son, claimed authority over the family's meager resources. When Begter took a fish that Temujin and his brother Hassar had caught, the dispute escalated beyond mere sibling rivalry. Temujin and Hassar tracked Begter down and killed him with arrows. This act of fratricide shocked even Hoelun, who reportedly told Temujin, "You came into the world grasping a blood clot. Now you have destroyed your brother. How will you destroy your enemies?" But the killing served its purpose. It established Temujin as the undisputed head of his family, young though he was. The second crucial event came when the Taichud tribe, perhaps fearing Temujin's growing reputation, captured him and held him prisoner. He was forced to wear a wooden collar called a kangwe and was displayed as a warning to others. But Temujin's charisma was already apparent. He convinced a guard named Sorgan Shire to help him escape, demonstrating the leadership qualities that would later attract thousands of followers. The third significant relationship formed during this period was his bond with Jamuka of the Jadaran clan. Twice during their childhood, Temujin and Jamuka swore oaths of eternal brotherhood, becoming Anda, blood brothers. They exchanged gifts, shared meals, and promised mutual support. This friendship would prove crucial in the years to come, though it would ultimately end in tragedy. Through all these tribulations, Temujin was learning invaluable lessons about leadership, loyalty, and survival. He discovered that charisma could be as powerful as force, that mercy could buy loyalty more effectively than fear, and that unity was strength, while division meant vulnerability. These harsh early experiences, rather than breaking him, forged him into a leader who understood both the desperation of the weak and the arrogance of the strong. By the time Temujin reached adolescence, he had survived abandonment, poverty, imprisonment, and family conflict. He had learned to navigate the complex web of tribal politics, to inspire loyalty in desperate circumstances, and to see opportunity where others saw only disaster. The boy who had been born clutching a blood clot was ready to claim his destiny, though the path ahead would prove even more challenging than the trials he had already endured. The making of a leader. As Temujin approached manhood, the foundational relationships and alliances that would define his rise to power began to take shape. In 1178, at the age of 16, he made a crucial decision that would alter the course of his life. He returned to claim his bride, Berta of the Conqueror tribe. Bert's father, Sechin, welcomed Temujin despite his family's fallen circumstances, recognizing something special in the young man. The marriage was formalized with traditional ceremonies, and Sechin presented Temujin with a magnificent black sable coat as dowry. This gift would prove more valuable than anyone could have imagined. Understanding that survival required powerful allies, Temujin made a strategic decision that demonstrated his growing political acumen. He took the precious sable coat to Togrul, Khan of the Khwarazm, who had been his father's ally and sworn brother. Presenting the coat as tribute, Temujin reminded Togrul of his obligations to Yesugei's memory and requested protection for his family. Togrul, impressed by the young man's boldness and remembering his friendship with Yesugei, accepted Temujin's allegiance. This alliance provided crucial legitimacy and protection, as the Khwarazm were one of the most powerful confederations on the steppes. Togrul became a father figure to Temujin, teaching him statecraft and providing the military support necessary for survival. But Temujin's newfound security was short-lived. The Merkits, remembering that Yesugei had once stolen Hoelun from them, decided to take their revenge on the next generation. In a dawn raid, they attacked Temujin's camp and abducted Berta, intending to give her to one of their warriors as wife. A traditional form of revenge that would humiliate Temujin and weaken his growing reputation. This crisis became the catalyst for Temujin's first major military campaign and his emergence as a significant leader. Desperate to recover his wife, he turned to his two most powerful allies, Togrul of the Khwarazm and his childhood Anda, Jamuka of the Jadaran. Both men agreed to help, recognizing that the Merkits' aggression threatened the stability of tribal relationships. The rescue mission that followed was masterfully planned and executed. The combined forces of over 20,000 warriors surrounded the Merkit camps in a coordinated night attack. Berta was successfully recovered, though she was already pregnant. Whether by Temujin or her merchant captor would remain a source of speculation throughout their lives. When she later gave birth to Yochi, Temujin accepted the boy as his own, demonstrating the pragmatic wisdom that would characterize his leadership. This successful campaign established Temujin as a military leader of note. Warriors began to gather around him, attracted by his success and his reputation for generosity to followers. Unlike traditional steppe leaders who ruled through birth and inherited authority, Temujin began to build a meritocracy, promoting men based on their abilities rather than their bloodlines. His relationship with Jamuka, however, began to show signs of strain. Both men were natural leaders with growing followings, and their approaches to leadership differed significantly. Jamuka represented the traditional aristocratic model, ruling through established tribal hierarchies and ancient customs. Temujin, perhaps because of his own experiences of abandonment and hardship, was more inclusive, welcoming followers from various tribes and backgrounds. The tension came to a head during a hunting expedition when a dispute arose over the division of spoils. The exact details are debated, but the result was clear. The two Anda parted ways, and their followers split into separate camps. This division marked the beginning of a struggle for dominance that would define the next phase of Mongol history. As Temujin established his independent following, he demonstrated the innovative leadership qualities that would later make him emperor. He instituted a system of shared spoils that ensured all followers benefited from successful raids. He welcomed skilled individuals regardless of their tribal origins, incorporating defeated enemies who showed loyalty and ability. He began to organize his forces using strict discipline and the traditional decimal system, but adapted these structures to promote unity rather than tribal division. His legal innovations were equally important. Even before the formal establishment of the Yassa Code, Temujin began implementing rules that protected the weak and regulated behavior within his growing confederation. Theft within the group was severely punished, while loyalty was rewarded regardless of social origin. These early legal concepts would later evolve into the comprehensive law code that governed the entire Mongol Empire. By the mid-1180s, Temujin had transformed from a desperate fugitive into a significant steppe leader. His confederation included not only Mongols, but also Turkic peoples, Chinese defectors, and others who found his inclusive approach preferable to traditional tribal structures. He had learned to balance force with diplomacy, understanding that lasting power required the consent of the governed as much as military strength. The stage was now set for the final confrontation that would determine the future of the Mongol peoples. Jamuka, representing the Old Order, commanded significant traditional support and claimed the title of Gurkhan, universal ruler. Temujin, leading the forces of change and unity, offered an alternative vision of Mongol society based on merit, law, and shared prosperity. The collision between these two forces would shake the steppes and ultimately determine whether the Mongols would remain forever divided or emerge as a unified empire capable of conquering the world. The path to supreme power. The inevitable confrontation between Temujin and Jamuka came to define the final phase of Mongol unification, a brutal struggle that would determine not just who ruled, but what kind of society would emerge from the chaos of tribal warfare. The first major battle occurred around 1187 at a place called Dalan Baljut. Jamuka, with his larger army and traditional support base, initially seemed to hold the advantage. His forces included many established tribal leaders who viewed Temujin's egalitarian approach as a dangerous threat to the established order. The battle was fierce and costly, resulting in a devastating defeat for Temujin's forces. In the aftermath of this defeat, Temujin experienced perhaps the darkest period of his adult life. Many of his followers abandoned him, seeking safety with more successful leaders. Some historians suggest he may have been forced to seek refuge with the Jin dynasty, becoming temporarily subordinate to the very people his ancestors had fought. If true, this period of humiliation would have provided valuable lessons about Chinese military organization, administrative systems, and siege warfare, knowledge that would prove crucial in later campaigns. But Temujin's greatest strength had always been his ability to learn from defeat and emerge stronger. By 1196, he had re-emerged as a significant force, having spent the intervening years carefully rebuilding his coalition and refining his approach to leadership. His temporary setback had paradoxically strengthened his position by weeding out fair-weather followers and allowing him to focus on those truly committed to his vision. The turning point came through his strategic alliance with Togrul of the Kurultais, who provided both legitimacy and military support for Temujin's renewed campaign. Together they launched a series of coordinated attacks against the Tatars, the ancient enemies of the Mongol peoples. These campaigns were not merely military operations, but acts of vengeance that resonated deeply with Mongol identity and helped solidify Temujin's reputation as a defender of Mongol interests. The war against the Tatars was marked by unprecedented brutality, reflecting both ancient hatreds and Temujin's evolving understanding of psychological warfare. When Tatar forces were defeated, Temujin ordered the systematic execution of all males taller than a cart axle, effectively eliminating the tribe's future military potential. This harsh policy served multiple purposes. It satisfied Mongol desires for revenge, prevented future rebellions, and demonstrated to other tribes the consequences of resistance. As Temujin's power grew, his relationship with Togrul became increasingly strained. The Kurultai Khan began to view his former protege as a threat rather than an ally. Influenced by his son Sengum and other advisors who feared Mongol ascendancy, Togrul made the fateful decision to move against Temujin before he became too powerful to challenge. In 1203, Togrul launched a surprise attack on Temujin's forces, The assault was carefully planned and nearly succeeded, catching the Mongols off guard and inflicting heavy casualties. Once again, Temujin found himself on the brink of destruction, his army scattered, and his reputation in ruins. But this crisis, like previous setbacks, ultimately revealed the depths of his resilience and strategic thinking. Rather than flee or seek another patron, Temujin embarked on one of the most remarkable comebacks in military history. Drawing on the loyalty he had cultivated among his core followers, he regrouped his scattered forces and began a systematic campaign to isolate and defeat Togrul. Using his superior knowledge of steppe warfare and the disciplined organization he had developed, Temujin gradually turned the tables on the Khwarites. The decisive battle came when Temujin managed to surprise Togrul's forces in their turn. The Khwarite Confederation, weakened by internal divisions and overconfident from their earlier success, was caught unprepared. Togrul himself was killed in the fighting, and his son Sengum fled to seek refuge among the Nomads. With the fall of the Khwarites, one of the steppe's most powerful forces had been eliminated, leaving Temujin as the dominant power among the Mongol tribes. Only two major obstacles now stood between Temujin and supreme authority over the steppes: the Naiman Confederation in the west and his former blood brother Jamuka, who had found refuge among various tribal groups and continued to represent the old order. The Naimans, under their leader Genghis Khan, represented the last great challenge to Mongol unification. They were a powerful Turkic people who controlled vast territories in western Mongolia and maintained sophisticated administrative systems learned from their contacts with Central Asian civilizations. When they offered sanctuary to Jamuka and other enemies of Temujin, the stage was set for the final confrontation. The battle against the Naimans showcased Temujin's mastery of both psychological and conventional warfare. On the night before the decisive engagement, he ordered his men to light multiple campfires spread across a wide area, creating the illusion of a vast army. The Naimans, deceived by this display, became demoralized and hesitant. When battle was joined, Temujin's forces, though outnumbered, fought with the cohesion and discipline that had become their hallmark. The defeat of the Naimans marked the effective end of resistance to Temujin's authority. Genghis Khan was killed in the battle, and his scattered forces either fled or submitted to the victorious Mongols. More importantly, the victory demonstrated to all remaining tribes that resistance was futile and that Temujin represented the future of the steppes. The final act in this drama of unification was the fate of Jamuka. Abandoned by his followers and recognizing the hopelessness of continued resistance, the former Anda was eventually captured and brought before Temujin. In a gesture that reflected both their shared history and his understanding of political necessity, Temujin offered Jamuka a place in his new order. But Jamuka, representing the old ways to the end, refused reconciliation and requested honorable death instead. Temujin granted this final request, ordering that Jamuka be executed without spilling his blood, a privilege accorded to royalty. With Jamuka's death, the last symbol of the old tribal system vanished, leaving Temujin as the undisputed master of the Mongol steppes. By 1206, after decades of warfare, diplomacy, and political maneuvering, Temujin had achieved what had seemed impossible: the unification of the fractious Mongol tribes under a single authority. The young man who had once fled from the Taichiud now stood ready to be proclaimed emperor of all the Mongols, having transformed a collection of warring clans into the foundation of what would become the largest contiguous empire in human history. The Great Kurultai and the birth of an empire. In the spring of 1206, beside the sacred Onon River, where Temujin had spent much of his childhood, an assembly unlike any in Mongol history gathered. The Kurultai, the great council of tribal leaders, had been called to address a momentous question. How should the newly unified Mongol peoples be organized and governed? The assembled chiefs and warriors represented virtually every significant group on the eastern steppes: Mongols, Turkic peoples, Tatars, Merkits, Karites, and many others who had once been bitter enemies now sat together under white felt banners, united by their acknowledgement of Temujin's supreme authority. The very fact that such an assembly was possible demonstrated the magnitude of the transformation that had taken place. When the ceremonies began, Temujin was raised on a white felt carpet, the traditional symbol of kingship among nomadic peoples. In a moment that would echo through history, he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, a title whose exact meaning remains debated by scholars, but which clearly conveyed the concept of universal or oceanic ruler. Some interpret it as firm, strong, and righteous, while others suggest it derives from the Turkic word Tengiz, meaning ocean, symbolizing rule over all lands beneath the eternal blue sky. But the significance of this Kurultai extended far beyond the conferring of a title. Genghis Khan used this assembly to announce revolutionary changes that would transform Mongol society and create the administrative foundation for a world empire. These reforms represented a complete break with traditional tribal structures and established principles that would govern one of history's most successful military organizations. The most fundamental change was the complete reorganization of Mongol society around the decimal military system. Traditional tribal affiliations were deliberately broken up and reformed into new units based on military efficiency rather than blood relationships. Every Mongol male became part of a strict hierarchy: Arbans of 10 men, Zuns of 100, Mingans of 1,000, and Tumans of 10,000. This system not only improved military coordination, but also broke the power of traditional tribal leaders who might challenge central authority. Leadership positions in this new system were awarded based on merit and loyalty rather than hereditary privilege. Genghis Khan promoted men from humble backgrounds to positions of great authority if they demonstrated competence and devotion to the unified Mongol cause. This meritocratic approach attracted talented individuals from all social levels and created a new elite whose power derived from the Khan rather than from traditional sources. To ensure absolute loyalty, Genghis Khan established the Keshig, an elite imperial guard that served multiple functions. Initially numbering 10,000 men, the Keshig was divided into day guards, Korchin Torkuds, and night guards, Kev Tul. Members of the guard were drawn from all parts of the empire and served not only as the Khan's personal protection, but also as a training ground for future commanders and administrators. By serving in the Keshig, young men from different backgrounds formed bonds of loyalty that transcended tribal origins. Perhaps most revolutionary was the promulgation of the Yassa, the great law code that would govern the Mongol Empire. The Yassa represented a codification of both traditional Mongol customs and new regulations designed to maintain order in a rapidly expanding state. Unlike previous steppe law, which had been oral and varied between tribes, the Yassa was written, universal, and applied equally to all subjects of the Khan. The Yassa addressed every aspect of life within the empire. It established severe punishments for theft, adultery, and desertion, but also protected the rights of orphans and widows. Religious tolerance was mandated, ensuring that conquered peoples could maintain their faiths without persecution. Trade was actively encouraged and protected, with severe penalties for those who molested merchants or disrupted commercial activities. One of the most significant provisions of the Yassa concerned succession and inheritance. Unlike traditional steppe practice, where the Khan's death often led to civil war, the new law established clear procedures for selecting successors and dividing imperial responsibilities. This legal framework would prove crucial in maintaining imperial unity after Genghis Khan's death. The military reforms announced at the Kurultai were equally comprehensive. The new Mongol army was organized for maximum flexibility and effectiveness, with standardized equipment, training, and tactics. Every warrior was required to maintain multiple horses, ensuring the mobility that would become the hallmark of Mongol warfare. Strict discipline was enforced, with harsh punishments for cowardice or insubordination, but generous rewards for valor and success. Communication systems were revolutionized with the establishment of the Yam, a postal relay network that would eventually span the entire empire. Stations were established at regular intervals along major routes, providing fresh horses, supplies, and protection for official messengers. This system allowed information to travel across vast distances with unprecedented speed, enabling centralized control over territories that would otherwise have been impossible to govern effectively. Social reforms were equally dramatic. The new order abolished many traditional privileges of birth and established principles of social mobility based on service to the state. Slavery continued to exist, but the treatment of captives was regulated by law, and opportunities for advancement were available to those who proved their loyalty and competence. Religious policy under the new regime was remarkably progressive for its time. Genghis Khan proclaimed complete religious freedom throughout his domains, exempting religious leaders from taxation and military service. This policy was not merely pragmatic, but reflected a genuine belief that spiritual diversity strengthened rather than weakened the state. Shamans, Buddhist monks, Christian priests, and Islamic scholars all found places in the new order. The economic foundations of the new empire were also addressed. Trade was elevated from a marginal activity to a central pillar of imperial policy. Merchants were granted high social status, protection during their travels, and favorable terms for their activities. The traditional Chinese view of merchants as parasites was completely reversed, with commerce seen as a vital source of imperial strength and prosperity. By the time the Kurultai concluded, Genghis Khan had established not just a personal dictatorship, but a sophisticated governmental system capable of ruling diverse populations across vast territories. The Mongol Empire that emerged from these reforms was no longer merely a confederation of tribes, but a true state with unified laws, standardized administration, and clear objectives. The success of these reforms was immediately apparent in the empire's military effectiveness and administrative efficiency. Within months of the Kurultai, Mongol forces were launching coordinated campaigns against external enemies with a level of organization and discipline that astonished contemporary observers. The age of Mongol conquest was about to begin, built on the solid foundation of the revolutionary system established in 1206. The First Conquests. With the Mongol tribes finally unified under his authority and a new governmental system in place, Genghis Khan faced a crucial decision: how to maintain the loyalty and momentum of his followers while establishing his empire's position in the broader world. The solution he chose would define the next phase of Mongol history, a series of carefully planned military campaigns that would transform the regional power created in 1206 into a force capable of challenging the greatest empires of the age. The first target was the Western Xia Kingdom, a Chinese-style dynasty established by the Tangut people in what is now northwestern China. This choice was strategically brilliant, as the Western Xia controlled crucial portions of the Silk Road trade routes and possessed wealth that could fund further expansion. Moreover, their defeat would serve as a demonstration of Mongol power to the larger and more dangerous Jin dynasty to the south. The campaign against the Western Xia began in 1209 and immediately demonstrated the effectiveness of the military reforms implemented after the Kurultai. Mongol forces moved with unprecedented coordination, using their superior mobility to strike at targets throughout Xia territory while avoiding pitched battles against fortified positions. The traditional Mongol tactics of feigned retreats, psychological warfare, and rapid maneuver proved devastatingly effective against the more conventional Tangut forces. By 1210, the Western Xia had been forced to acknowledge Mongol suzerainty and agree to pay tribute. This victory served multiple purposes beyond mere territorial expansion. The tribute payments provided resources for future campaigns, while the demonstration of Mongol military effectiveness attracted additional followers from throughout the region. Perhaps most importantly, the campaign provided valuable experience in siege warfare and the governance of sedentary populations, skills that would prove essential in later conquests. The success against the Western Xia inevitably brought the Mongols into conflict with the Jin dynasty, the most powerful state in northern China. The Jin, ruled by the Jurchen people, controlled territories extending from Manchuria to the Yellow River and commanded armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Their capital at Zhongdu, modern Beijing, was one of the world's largest cities, protected by massive walls and defended by sophisticated military technology. The Jin had long manipulated steppe politics through divide and rule tactics, supporting some tribes against others and collecting tribute from nomadic confederations. They viewed the emergence of a unified Mongol state as an intolerable threat to their security and attempted to reassert their traditional dominance through diplomatic pressure. When a Jin delegation arrived at Genghis Khan's court in 1210 demanding submission, the response was both dramatic and decisive. According to historical accounts, Genghis Khan spat in the direction of the Jin capital, mounted his horse, and rode north without a word. This contemptuous rejection of Jin authority was tantamount to a declaration of war, and both sides immediately began preparing for a conflict that would determine the balance of power in East Asia. The Mongol invasion of Jin territory began in 1211 and quickly revealed both the strengths and limitations of the nascent empire. Mongol cavalry proved devastatingly effective in open battle, repeatedly defeating Jin armies that vastly outnumbered them. The battles of Yehuling and Huanerjui saw Mongol forces of 20,000, 30,000 warriors destroy Jin armies of 100,000 or more through superior tactics, mobility, and coordination. However, the Jin campaign also exposed significant weaknesses in Mongol capabilities. The traditional steppe military system was poorly adapted to siege warfare, and initial attempts to capture fortified cities ended in costly failures. Recognizing this limitation, Genghis Khan demonstrated the adaptability that characterized his leadership by actively seeking to learn siege techniques from Chinese engineers and craftsmen who defected to the Mongol cause. The process of acquiring siege warfare expertise reveals much about Mongol military innovation. Rather than stubbornly persisting with traditional methods, Genghis Khan welcomed technical knowledge from any source and systematically incorporated new techniques into Mongol military practice. Chinese engineers taught Mongol forces to construct and operate catapults, siege towers, and other specialized equipment. More importantly, they learned to coordinate combined arms tactics that integrated traditional cavalry charges with siege operations and infantry assaults. This technological adaptation bore fruit in 1213 when Mongol forces finally breached the Great Wall and began advancing on the Jin capital. The psychological impact of this achievement was enormous, as the Great Wall had long been considered an impregnable barrier protecting Chinese civilization from barbarian invasion. Its fall demonstrated conclusively that the traditional methods of defense were inadequate against the new Mongol military system. The siege of Zhongdu, Beijing, in 1214-1215 marked the culmination of the first phase of Mongol expansion into China. The operation demonstrated how completely the Mongols had mastered the art of siege warfare in just a few years. Using a combination of direct assault, economic blockade, and psychological warfare, they gradually wore down the city's defenses despite its massive fortifications and large garrison. The fall of Zhongdu in 1215 was a watershed moment in East Asian history. The city's capture yielded enormous wealth in gold, silk, and other precious goods, providing resources for further expansion. More significantly, it marked the effective collapse of Jin power north of the Yellow River and established the Mongols as the dominant force in northern China. Parallel to these Chinese campaigns, Mongol forces were also active in Central Asia. In 1218, the general Jebe completed the conquest of the Kurultai, a kingdom that controlled much of modern Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. This victory extended Mongol authority to the borders of the Khwarazmian Empire and set the stage for the dramatic westward expansion that would follow. These early conquests established patterns that would characterize the entire period of Mongol expansion. Mongol forces combined traditional steppe tactics with innovations borrowed from conquered peoples, creating a military system that proved effective against every type of opponent they encountered. Their willingness to adapt and learn, combined with superior organization and discipline, made them virtually unstoppable on the battlefield. Perhaps most importantly, these campaigns demonstrated that the administrative and legal reforms implemented in 1206 could function effectively on a massive scale. The decimal military system provided the organizational framework for coordinating complex multi-front campaigns, while the Yassa legal code maintained discipline and unity among forces drawn from diverse backgrounds. The YAM communication system enabled rapid coordination across vast distances, allowing Genghis Khan to direct simultaneous operations in China and Central Asia. By 1218, the Mongol Empire had grown from a regional confederation of steppe tribes into a major power capable of challenging the greatest states of the age. The conquests in China and Central Asia had provided both the material resources and the military experience necessary for even more ambitious undertakings. The stage was now set for the dramatic Western campaigns that would carry Mongol arms to the gates of Europe and establish the foundation of the largest contiguous empire in human history. The Great Western Campaign. The event that would trigger the most spectacular expansion in Mongol history began with a commercial dispute that escalated into a conflict of unprecedented scale and devastation. The relationship between Genghis Khan and the Khwarazmian Empire, which controlled much of Central Asia and Iran, had initially been cordial, with both rulers recognizing the mutual benefits of trade and peaceful coexistence. The Khwarazmian Empire, ruled by Ala ad-Din Muhammad II, was at its zenith in the early 13th century. Stretching from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf and from the Caucasus to Afghanistan, it controlled some of the world's most prosperous trade routes and commanded armies that numbered in the hundreds of thousands. The empire's capital at Gurganj and major cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Isfahan were among the most magnificent in the Islamic world. Genghis Khan, having established control over northern China and parts of Central Asia, was eager to develop commercial relationships with his western neighbors. The Mongol economy had always been partially dependent on trade, and the wealth generated by the Chinese conquests created both the desire and the means for expanded commercial activity. In 1218, he dispatched a large trade caravan to the Khwarazmian Empire, accompanied by diplomatic envoys with instructions to establish formal trading agreements. The caravan, consisting of several hundred merchants and carrying valuable goods, including gold, silver, silk, and precious stones, represented a significant investment in peaceful commercial relations. However, when it reached the border city of Otrar, the local governor, Inalchuk, made a decision that would have catastrophic consequences. Suspecting the merchants of being spies, or perhaps simply motivated by greed, he ordered the entire caravan massacred and their goods confiscated. Genghis Khan's response to this outrage demonstrated both his diplomatic sophistication and his determination to maintain Mongol prestige. Rather than immediately launching a military response, he sent 3 envoys to the Khwarazmian court, demanding the surrender of Inalchuk for punishment and compensation for the murdered merchants. This measured approach showed his preference for diplomatic solutions when possible and provided the Khwarazm Shah with an opportunity to avoid war through negotiation. The Khwarazm Shah's reaction, however, sealed the fate of his empire. Not only did he refuse to surrender Inalchuk, but he ordered one of the Mongol envoys killed and the others mutilated before sending them back. This deliberate humiliation of diplomatic representatives violated the most fundamental principles of international conduct and made war inevitable. Genghis Khan had learned from Chinese political theory that a ruler's prestige was essential to maintaining authority, and such an insult could not go unpunished without appearing weak. The military campaign that followed would demonstrate the full potential of the reformed Mongol military system. Unlike previous operations that had been essentially large-scale raids, the Western campaign was planned as a comprehensive conquest aimed at completely destroying the Khwarazmian Empire and incorporating its territories into the Mongol domain. The scale of preparation was unprecedented, with Mongol forces estimated at between 150,000 and 200,000 warriors supported by extensive siege trains and logistical networks. The strategic concept underlying the campaign was brilliantly conceived and flawlessly executed. Rather than attempting a single massive invasion that could be concentrated against and potentially defeated, Genghis Khan divided his forces into multiple armies that would attack the empire simultaneously from different directions. This multi-axis approach would prevent the Khwarazm Shahs from concentrating their forces and would maximize the psychological impact of the invasion. The main force, commanded by Genghis Khan himself, advanced directly toward the empire's heartland in Transoxiana. Simultaneously, his eldest son Yoshi led an army down the Sirdarya River Valley, while the generals Jebe and Subutai commanded an independent force that would execute one of the most remarkable strategic maneuvers in military history: a march through the Kizil Kum Desert to emerge behind the main Khwarazmian defensive positions. The psychological warfare that preceded the main military operations was as important as the physical combat. Mongol intelligence networks, which had been established throughout Central Asia during the previous decade of commercial contact, spread terror through deliberate exaggeration of Mongol numbers and brutality. Stories of cities completely destroyed and populations entirely massacred preceded the advancing armies, creating panic and undermining the will to resist. When the military campaign began in earnest in 1219, the effectiveness of Mongol tactical innovations became immediately apparent. The siege of Otrar, the city where the caravan had been massacred, demonstrated how completely the Mongols had mastered the art of fortress warfare. Using techniques learned from Chinese engineers, combined with psychological pressure and systematic destruction of the surrounding countryside, they reduced the supposedly impregnable city within 6 months. The fate of Otrar's governor, Inalchuk, became a powerful symbol of Mongol justice. When the city finally fell, he was captured alive and executed by having molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, a punishment that emphasized both the commercial nature of his crime and the Mongol commitment to protecting trade. This dramatic execution was widely reported and served to reinforce the message that resistance to Mongol authority was futile. The campaign's momentum accelerated as Mongol forces advanced deeper into Khwarazmian territory. Bukhara, one of the greatest centers of Islamic learning and culture, surrendered without resistance in 1220 after its garrison fled. Genghis Khan reportedly entered the city's great mosque and declared it a stable for his horses, demonstrating his complete contempt for his enemy's pretensions to religious authority. The siege of Samarkand, however, revealed the true scale of Mongol military capabilities. This ancient city, protected by massive fortifications and defended by a garrison of over 100,000 men, was considered one of the strongest positions in Central Asia. Yet Mongol forces, using a combination of direct assault, siege engines, and the systematic use of captured civilians as human shields reduced it in just 10 days. The speed of this victory shocked the Islamic world and demonstrated that no fortification, however strong, could withstand the reformed Mongol military machine. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Western campaign was the deep penetration raid conducted by Jebe and Subutai. After completing their assigned objectives in Central Asia, these two generals received permission to continue westward in pursuit of the fleeing Khwarazm Shah. What began as a limited pursuit mission evolved into an epic journey that would carry Mongol forces across the Caucasus Mountains and into the heart of Europe. The destruction wrought by the Western campaign was unprecedented in scale and thoroughness. Entire cities were razed. Irrigation systems that had supported civilization for centuries were destroyed, and populations were systematically massacred or enslaved. The great centers of Islamic civilization in Central Asia, Balkh, Merv, Nishapur, and others, were so completely destroyed that some never recovered their former importance. Yet this campaign also demonstrated the constructive aspects of Mongol imperial policy. Cities that surrendered without resistance were spared destruction and often prospered under Mongol rule. Artisans, scholars, and administrators were systematically relocated to other parts of the empire where their skills were needed. The Mongol policy of religious tolerance meant that Islamic institutions continued to function in conquered territories, and trade relationships were quickly re-established once political control was secure. The Western campaign concluded in 1231 with the complete destruction of the Khwarazmian Empire and the flight of its ruler to a small island in the Caspian Sea, where he died shortly thereafter. Meanwhile, Jebe and Subutai had continued their remarkable march, defeating Georgian armies, overrunning Russian principalities, and advancing to within striking distance of Kiev before finally returning to Mongolia with intelligence about European military capabilities. This campaign established the Mongol Empire as the dominant power from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean and demonstrated that no existing political or military system could successfully resist Mongol expansion. The speed, scale, and thoroughness of the conquest shocked contemporary observers and established a reputation for invincibility that would facilitate future Mongol conquests. More importantly, it provided the material resources and administrative experience necessary to govern a truly transcontinental empire. The administrative genius. While the military conquests of Genghis Khan captured the attention of contemporary chroniclers, his true genius lay in his ability to transform a collection of conquered territories into a unified, efficiently governed empire. The administrative system he created was remarkably sophisticated, combining traditional Mongol practices with innovations borrowed from the various civilizations he had encountered during his conquests. The foundation of Mongol imperial administration was the principle of meritocracy. that had been established during the original unification of the Mongol tribes. Unlike most medieval governments which relied heavily on hereditary aristocrats, the Mongol Empire systematically promoted individuals based on their abilities and achievements, rather than their social origins. This policy created a loyal administrative class whose power derived from the Khan's favor rather than from traditional sources of authority. The decimal military system that had proven so effective in warfare was seamlessly extended to civilian administration. The same organizational principles that governed armies, units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, were applied to the governance of sedentary populations. This created a hierarchical structure that facilitated communication, resource allocation, and the implementation of imperial policies across vast distances and diverse cultures. Religious policy under Genghis Khan was revolutionary in its tolerance and sophistication. The Great Yassa explicitly guaranteed freedom of worship for all subjects of the empire, regardless of their faith. This policy was not merely pragmatic, but reflected a genuine belief that religious diversity strengthened rather than weakened the state. Christian priests, Islamic scholars, Buddhist monks, and Taoist sages all found places in the imperial administration, often serving as advisors on matters relating to their respective communities. The economic policies implemented by Genghis Khan demonstrated his understanding that military conquest was meaningless without the ability to generate sustainable wealth. Trade was elevated from a marginal activity to a central pillar of imperial policy, with merchants granted unprecedented protection and privileges. The traditional Chinese view of commerce as a parasitic activity was completely reversed, with traders recognized as essential contributors to imperial prosperity. The establishment of the Yam communication system was perhaps the most impressive administrative achievement of the early Mongol Empire. This network of relay stations, which eventually extended from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean, enabled rapid communication across previously unimaginable distances. Stations were established at regular intervals along major routes, providing fresh horses, supplies, and protection for official messengers. The system was so efficient that messages could travel from one end of the empire to the other in a matter of weeks rather than months. Legal unification under the Great Yassa represented another revolutionary achievement. For the first time in history, a single legal code applied across territories that encompassed dozens of different cultures and legal traditions. The Yassa addressed not only criminal law, but also commercial regulations, military discipline, and social relationships. Its provisions were designed to promote imperial unity while respecting local customs that did not conflict with imperial interests. The Mongol approach to governing conquered populations was remarkably flexible and pragmatic. Rather than attempting to impose a single administrative model throughout the empire, Genghis Khan adapted existing governmental systems to serve imperial purposes. In China, traditional Chinese administrative practices were retained but modified to ensure Mongol control. In Central Asia, Islamic administrative traditions continued to function under Mongol oversight. This flexible approach minimized resistance while maximizing administrative efficiency. Taxation policy under the Mongol Empire reflected both traditional steppe practices and innovations designed to support a complex governmental structure. Rather than relying solely on tribute payments, as had been customary among nomadic confederations, the Mongols developed sophisticated tax collection systems adapted to different economic structures. Agricultural regions were assessed based on land productivity, while commercial centers were taxed according to trade volumes. Nomadic populations continued to pay traditional tribute in livestock and military service. The integration of foreign expertise was a hallmark of Mongol administrative practice. Recognizing that the traditional nomadic lifestyle had not prepared them for governing sedentary populations, Mongol rulers actively recruited skilled administrators from conquered territories. Chinese bureaucrats, Islamic scholars, Persian administrators, and European craftsmen all found opportunities for advancement within the imperial system, creating a truly cosmopolitan ruling class. Educational policy under Genghis Khan reflected his understanding that effective administration required literate officials. Although he himself may have been illiterate, he actively promoted the adoption of writing systems and encouraged the translation of important texts into Mongolian. The Uyghur script was adopted as the official written language of the empire, while schools were established to train the administrators needed to govern the expanding territories. The Mongol legal system's emphasis on protecting the weak and vulnerable was surprisingly progressive for its era. The Great Yassa included specific provisions protecting orphans, widows, and other defenseless individuals from exploitation. These humanitarian concerns reflected both traditional Mongol values and Genghis Khan's personal experience of vulnerability during his youth. The legal protection of merchants and their property was particularly comprehensive, recognizing their essential role in imperial prosperity. Judicial administration was carefully structured to ensure both efficiency and fairness. A hierarchy of courts was established, with local judges handling routine matters and higher courts reserved for serious crimes and disputes involving significant interests. The appointment of Genghis Khan's stepbrother Shiki Hutug as supreme judge demonstrated the importance placed on maintaining legal uniformity throughout the empire. The role of the Keishi, the imperial guard, extended far beyond personal protection to encompass administrative functions. Members of the guard served as a training ground for future governors and commanders, learning the skills needed to administer diverse populations. The guard's multinational composition ensured that future administrators would have experience working with people from different cultural backgrounds, preparing them for the challenges of imperial governance. Record keeping and documentation were systematically organized to support effective administration. Unlike traditional nomadic societies, which relied primarily on oral tradition, the Mongol Empire maintained extensive written records of laws, regulations, tax assessments, and administrative decisions. This bureaucratic infrastructure enabled consistent policy implementation and facilitated communication between different levels of government. The success of these administrative innovations was evident in the empire's ability to maintain unity and efficiency despite its enormous size and cultural diversity. The system created by Genghis Khan proved sufficiently flexible to adapt to different circumstances while maintaining core principles of merit-based promotion, religious tolerance, and commercial protection. These achievements in governance were as significant as the military victories that created the empire and provided the foundation for centuries of Mongol rule across Eurasia. The final campaign and death of the Great Khan. By 1226, Genghis Khan was approximately 64 years old and had spent over 2 decades building and expanding his empire. Despite his age and the accumulated toll of countless campaigns, he remained as determined as ever to complete the unfinished business that had occupied him since the beginning of his imperial career. The Western Xia Kingdom, which had been forced to acknowledge Mongol suzerainty in 1209, had proven to be an unreliable vassal, repeatedly failing to provide promised military support and tribute payments. The decision to launch a final campaign against the Western Xia was motivated by both practical and symbolic considerations. From a strategic perspective, the Tangut Kingdom's continued defiance threatened Mongol control over vital trade routes and encouraged other vassals to consider rebellion. More personally, Genghis Khan viewed the Tangut resistance as a direct challenge to his authority that required decisive response. The campaign would serve as a demonstration that even in his advancing years, the Great Khan remained a formidable military leader, capable of punishing those who defied his will. The military preparations for this final campaign reflected the full sophistication of the Mongol war machine that had evolved over 20 years of conquest. Unlike the relatively simple operations of the early unification period, the Western Xia campaign involved complex logistical planning, coordinated multi-front attacks, and the integration of siege warfare techniques perfected during the Chinese and Central Asian campaigns. Genghis Khan personally commanded the main army, demonstrating his continued commitment to active military leadership despite his age. The force included not only traditional Mongol cavalry, but also Chinese engineers, Islamic siege specialists, and auxiliary troops drawn from across the empire. This multinational army exemplified the cosmopolitan character that had come to define Mongol military operations. The campaign began in late 1226 with characteristic Mongol efficiency and brutality. Wu-wei, the second largest city in the Western Xia Kingdom, surrendered without resistance and was spared destruction as a reward for its pragmatic decision. Liangqiao fell after brief resistance, and by autumn, Mongol forces had crossed the Helan Mountains and were approaching Yinchuan, the Tangut capital. The siege of Yinchuan became the focal point of Genghis Khan's final military operation. The city's fortifications were formidable, and its garrison was prepared to resist, but the outcome was never seriously in doubt. Mongol siege techniques had become so sophisticated that even the strongest fortifications could be systematically reduced through a combination of engineering skill, psychological pressure, and sheer persistence. During the siege, an event occurred that would define the final phase of Genghis Khan's life. According to various accounts, he suffered a serious injury, possibly from a fall while hunting or during military operations. Some sources suggest illness rather than injury, but all agree that his condition was grave enough to raise questions about his ability to complete the campaign personally. Despite his deteriorating health, Genghis Khan refused to abandon the siege or delegate command to his subordinates. His determination to personally oversee the final subjugation of the Western Xia reflected both his legendary willpower and his understanding that any sign of weakness might encourage broader rebellion throughout the empire. The siege continued under his direct supervision, with Mongol forces systematically tightening their grip around the city. The Battle of the Yellow River, fought near Yinchuan, resulted in the complete destruction of a Tangut relief army, numbering approximately 300,000 men. This victory eliminated the Western Xia's last hope of breaking the siege and demonstrated once again the superiority of Mongol military tactics. The defeated Tangut forces were systematically slaughtered in accordance with Mongol policy toward those who resisted imperial authority. As the siege dragged on through the winter of 1220-1227, Genghis Khan's condition continued to deteriorate, yet he maintained his active involvement in military operations while simultaneously planning for the future governance of his vast empire. Understanding that his death was approaching, he summoned his sons and closest advisors to discuss succession arrangements and the completion of ongoing campaigns. The succession planning conducted during these final months revealed the administrative sophistication that had become characteristic of Mongol imperial governance. Rather than simply naming a single heir, Genghis Khan developed a complex arrangement that divided imperial responsibilities among his sons while maintaining overall unity under the authority of a great Khan. This system was designed to prevent the civil wars that had historically followed the death of steppe rulers. In August 1227, as the siege of Yinchuan approached its conclusion, Genghis Khan died. The exact circumstances of his death remain unclear, with various sources suggesting different causes ranging from battle injuries to illness to hunting accidents. What is certain is that his death was initially kept secret to prevent any disruption of ongoing military operations. The secrecy surrounding Genghis Khan's death demonstrates the disciplined character of the organization he had created. His commanders were able to maintain operational security while completing the conquest of the Western Xia, ensuring that the campaign concluded successfully, despite the loss of its supreme leader. Yinchuan finally surrendered, in September 1227, and Emperor Moju was promptly executed in accordance with Mongol policy toward defeated rulers who had resisted imperial authority. The treatment of the Western Xia following Genghis Khan's death reflected both his personal vindictiveness and established Mongol practice. The kingdom was systematically destroyed, with cities pillaged, populations slaughtered or enslaved, and the entire political structure eliminated. This thoroughgoing destruction served as a final demonstration of the consequences of defying Mongol authority and ensured that the Western Xia would never again pose a threat to imperial interests. The funeral arrangements for Genghis Khan were conducted with extraordinary secrecy that has preserved their mystery to this day. According to Mongol tradition, the location of his burial was kept secret to prevent desecration by enemies. Legend holds that anyone who witnessed the funeral procession was killed to maintain secrecy, and that 1,000 horses were driven over the grave site to obliterate all traces of its location. The 2-year interregnum that followed Genghis Khan's death tested the administrative system he had created. Despite the absence of supreme authority, the empire continued to function effectively under the collective leadership of his sons and trusted generals. This stability demonstrated the institutional strength that had been built into the Mongol governmental system and validated the succession arrangements that had been established during his final months. When Ogedei Khan finally assumed the title of Great Khan in 1229, he inherited not just territories, but a sophisticated governmental structure capable of governing the largest contiguous empire in human history. The death of Genghis Khan marked the end of the empire's founding period, but the institutions he had created would continue to function effectively for generations, enabling his successors to extend Mongol rule even further across Eurasia. The legacy of Genghis Khan. As we reach the end of our journey through the life and times of Genghis Khan, we must pause to consider the extraordinary magnitude of what this remarkable man accomplished in just over 2 decades of imperial rule. When Temujin was born around 1162, the Mongol steppes were a patchwork of warring tribes with no significant impact on world affairs. By the time of his death in 1227, the empire he had created stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, encompassing territories that included modern-day Mongolia, China, Central Asia, Iran, and parts of Russia. But the true measure of Genghis Khan's legacy extends far beyond territorial conquest. He fundamentally transformed the nature of warfare, governance, and international relations in ways that continued to influence world history long after his death. The military innovations he pioneered combined arms tactics, psychological warfare, siege techniques, and strategic mobility became standard practices adopted by armies throughout Eurasia. His administrative reforms, particularly the emphasis on meritocracy and religious tolerance, challenged traditional hierarchies and created new models of imperial governance. The economic impact of the Mongol Empire was equally revolutionary. The Pax Mongolica established secure trade routes connecting east and west for the first time in history, facilitating the exchange of goods, technologies, and ideas on an unprecedented scale. The Silk Road reached its zenith under Mongol protection, enabling merchants like Marco Polo to travel safely from Europe to China and back. This commercial revolution had profound consequences for global economic development and cultural exchange. Perhaps most remarkably, Genghis Khan's vision of religious tolerance and cultural diversity became a defining characteristic of the Mongol Empire. In an age when religious warfare was common and cultural assimilation was typically imposed by conquest, the Mongol policy of protecting all faiths and preserving local customs was genuinely revolutionary. This tolerance was not merely pragmatic but reflected a sophisticated understanding that diversity strengthened rather than weakened imperial unity. The legal innovations embodied in the Great Yassa created one of history's first truly international legal systems. For the first time, a single code of laws applied across vast territories, encompassing dozens of different cultures and legal traditions. The emphasis on protecting merchants, safeguarding the weak, and ensuring judicial fairness established precedents that influenced legal development throughout Eurasia for centuries to come. The institutional structures created by Genghis Khan proved remarkably durable, continuing to function effectively long after his death. The succession system he established prevented the immediate collapse of the empire, while the administrative framework he designed enabled his successors to govern territories of unprecedented size and complexity. The division of the empire into four major khanates after 1260 reflected not failure but the successful adaptation of Mongol governmental principles to different regional circumstances. The cultural impact of the Mongol Empire was equally profound. The exchange of knowledge, technologies, and artistic traditions that occurred under Mongol rule accelerated human development in countless ways. Chinese printing technology spread to the West. Islamic mathematical concepts reached Europe, and European innovations found their way to Asia. This cross-cultural pollination contributed to intellectual and technological advances that shaped the modern world. Yet we must also acknowledge the darker aspects of Genghis Khan's legacy. The conquests that created his empire resulted in unprecedented destruction and loss of life. Entire cities were razed, sophisticated civilizations were destroyed, and millions of people were killed or enslaved. The demographic impact of Mongol conquests was so severe that some regions did not recover their pre-invasion populations for centuries. Modern assessment of Genghis Khan's historical significance must balance these positive and negative aspects. While his methods were often brutal, even by the standards of his time, the long-term consequences of his achievements were largely beneficial for human development. The connections he forged between East and West, the administrative innovations he pioneered, and the precedents he established for religious tolerance and cultural diversity had lasting positive effects that extended far beyond his own lifetime. The personal transformation of Temujin into Genghis Khan remains one of history's most remarkable stories, of individual achievement. From an abandoned child struggling for survival on the steppes, he became the ruler of the largest contiguous empire in human history. His journey illustrates the potential for individual determination and vision to reshape the world, while also demonstrating the importance of adaptability, learning, and the ability to inspire loyalty in others. Today, more than 8 centuries after his death, Genghis Khan remains a figure of fascination and controversy. In Mongolia, he is revered as the founding father of the nation and a symbol of Mongol identity and pride. In other parts of the world, particularly in regions that experienced Mongol conquest, his memory is associated with destruction and trauma. These different perspectives reflect the complex and multifaceted nature of his historical impact. The study of Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire offers valuable insights into the dynamics of empire building, the challenges of governing diverse populations, and the long-term consequences of political and military innovation. His success in creating institutional structures capable of transcending cultural and linguistic barriers provides lessons that remain relevant for leaders and societies facing similar challenges in our interconnected modern world. As we conclude this exploration of one of history's most extraordinary figures, we are reminded that the past continues to shape the present in ways both obvious and subtle. The trade routes pioneered under Mongol rule evolved into modern commercial networks. The legal principles established in the Great Yassa influenced subsequent legal development, and the precedent of religious tolerance set by the Mongol Empire contributed to evolving concepts of human rights and cultural diversity. Genghis Khan's story teaches us that even the most unlikely individuals can achieve extraordinary things through determination, adaptability, and vision. More importantly, it demonstrates that the consequences of human actions can extend far beyond their original context, shaping the course of history for generations to come. In understanding the life and legacy of Genghis Khan, we gain insight not only into the medieval world, but into the enduring human capacity for both creation and destruction, for both innovation and tradition, for both unity and diversity. The great Khan who once ruled from the steppes of Mongolia to the gates of Europe has been dead for nearly 8 centuries, but his influence on world history continues to resonate. His empire eventually fragmented and his dynasty ended. But the connections he forged between civilizations, the precedents he established for governance and law, and the vision he articulated of a unified world under common rule have left an indelible mark on human development. In this sense, the empire of Genghis Khan was not merely a political entity, but a transformative force that helped create the interconnected world we inhabit today. Thank you for joining me on this remarkable journey through time and across continents. The story of Genghis Khan reminds us that history is shaped not by abstract forces, but by the choices and actions of individuals who dare to envision a different future and possess the determination to make it reality. Until we meet again for our next historical adventure, may you carry with you the inspiration of those who have dared to change the world.